Welcome to Parenting on Purpose, a podcast where we discuss parenting topics to help you raise your children intentionally so that they find their unique purpose, place, and contribution to the world. My guests will be sharing childhood stories that have impacted their adult life to help us understand why parenting on purpose is so important. I will also answer your questions on how to raise children to be successful inside and outside the classroom. I'm your host, Abiera Bolu. I've been a teacher for over 15 years, teaching children as young as 4 all the way to age 18. I believe that a successful life is a life lived on purpose for a purpose. Hello, Chika. So good to have you here on Parenting on Purpose. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really excited to be here. I can't wait to talk.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to tell our listeners a bit about Chika. Honestly, Chika, there's so much to say about you. So Chika is a financial services senior program manager with over 10 years experience. You're working for a leading international investment bank now. I have to mention, because how many countries have you been to? This is one thing I try and count. How many?
I've been to 30 countries.
So it's fair to say that your hobby is traveling. What is it about traveling and meeting new people that's so interesting for you? Why do you, because for me, I'll just start by saying traveling for me, it's more, I see it more of a stress until I'm there and I'm having fun.
Yeah.
So I'm always intrigued. What is it for you with traveling?
Oof. It's everything. It's exactly what you said. It's the idea of meeting people. I love culture. You know, when I go to a place, what I'm interested in seeing is what kind of food do they eat? What is their language? What is their way of life? How do they go about their daily experiences of life? And there's something about, for me, when going to these countries, it's like I want to immerse myself in their experience of life. And so that, that for me is why I love traveling. Obviously, outside of seeing beautiful places on earth which God has created, and just getting to sample, like delicious food, drinks. I love the whole experience. Yeah.
I lived through your photos. I'm not gonna lie. Your background is in technology. Now, that's very interesting, obviously, because of what you're developing now. I really want you to talk about Marbl mental health. That's really the main thing. So this is obviously, it's about parenting and the intentionality behind it. And I always talk to my listeners about how important it is for us to look after ourselves. And so it's so fitting that you're here with us. I want you to please just tell us a bit about Marbl mental health first.
Yeah, sure. Marbl is what do I call it? It's a telepsychology app, which I am currently working on, which will provide online therapy services to users, right, regardless of their geographical location. The idea first came about in 2017 when I was going through a very difficult season myself, and I was fortunate to get access to therapy, traditional therapy, i.e. face-to-face. And right about the same time, there was a global challenge organized by MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and it was focused on brain health and what we could do to prevent mental health conditions, but also treating mental health conditions globally, as it is actually a pandemic, though a lot of people may not realize this, or maybe now people are starting to realize that. And so that was something that really piqued my interest. And that was how the journey to Marbl started about.
I mean, there are people that talk passionately about mental health, but you've come at it from a technology aspect and wanting to start something that makes it easy for people to just reach out for help. And that's so important for my listeners. It's so important. A lot of times, as just generally as humans, but as parents as well, you don't even realize the strain and the stress that you're going through and not wanting to seek help. So having something like Marbl that someone can just click on their phone, it's like an app, and they get in touch with people who can help them. I've just found that so fascinating. So I have to say this, not long ago, I put up a video on Instagram that was very moving for me. And I know that I've got so many people get in touch with me. It was basically about African parenting, or what people consider African parenting to be, not necessarily what I believe it should be labeled, but, the connotation of African parenting being, quite aggressive, as if that's the way we are. And I know it's so different to who we actually are. So speaking to you was just so important for me because I want people to realize the importance of some of the things that we might do or see as normal and the impact that it might have on us. It might have on our mental health. This is one of the main reasons why I asked you to please come and speak on the podcast. You know a lot about mental health and how things from people's childhood actually creeps up. It's always there where you don't
Yep.
realize. But before, you help us out with that, do you mind just telling us about why you needed therapy, why this became such a passion for you? I mean, I've known you for quite a while, and you're the kind of person that nobody would expect needed therapy because everybody thinks therapy is for special people that,
Exactly.
honestly. So just
Yeah.
how did you find yourself there?
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite a long and interesting journey, but I would say a number of years ago, I was going through a very stressful time in my life. I was working in a very stressful job, long hours. Was also going through health issues, and I found that over time, my mood had changed. I would wake up in the mornings, I'd cry before I go to work, like have a good cry session, literally before going to work. You pick, and after that, I'd wipe my face, put on my makeup, and go to work like everything was all good. And but I think deep down, I knew that something wasn't really quite right. I don't think it's really normal to wake up almost every day and cry for no apparent reason and then just carry on like nothing happened. So all of that was going on, and I went to see the doctor for something else entirely, for just, I can't even quite remember exactly what I went for. I think it was for one of the health issues or whatever I was going through at the time. And she was the one who asked me, she looked at me and she was like, "Are you sure you're not depressed?" And I
Oh,
just remember looking at her like, seriously,
mhm.
like, how dare you even say
Yeah.
that to me?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, she had told me to self-refer to. So at the time, the company I was working for had a team called the Critical Care Solutions, which was basically a specialist team of doctor and a nurse who helped people going through any sort of health conditions that, any chronic health conditions that um, was they were struggling with at the time. So I remember calling the critical care nurse, and as I was talking through, what my symptoms were and everything going on with work, I basically burst out crying. And she was like, "Well, okay, you need to speak to the doctor as well." And so she booked an appointment for me to speak to the critical care doctor. And at the same time as I was talking about just everything going on with work and how I was feeling, I also bursted out crying.
Mm,
And he was the one that said to me, "If you carry on like this, you will have a breakdown. So I
mm,
think that you need time off work. I think that you need to see someone and talk, just deal with everything that is going on." And so he referred me. He referred me to a psychiatrist, which at the time was like, oh my God, I
yeah.
can't believe this is happening. I mean, I didn't feel like it was something that I wanted to do. But at the same time, I think, inside of me, I knew that things had come to a head. I knew that I was at the point where
Mm,
some kind of intervention was going to be needed if I was going to get back to, my usual self, my usual, like life.
mhm,
So I saw the psychiatrist, I spoke to her, and she referred me to a psychologist, so a therapist or a counselor. These terms are used interchangeably. So that was how my journey to therapy began. And I remember my first session sitting there and just thinking, I don't want to be here.
mhm.
Like, I don't feel like I need to be here. Like, there's nothing wrong with me in that sense.
Do you feel there's a
Um,
stigma attached to it? Is that
oh
what you were
yeah.
worried about?
Absolutely. It was the feeling of, because I think, like you rightly said, right, sadly or rightly or wrongly, people have this notion that therapy is for people with serious mental health conditions. So maybe it's somebody, I mean, particularly where we come from, we come from Africa. And really, for most of us growing up in Africa, the notion of mental health is the mad person on the street who's
Mm,
naked. So the
mm,
idea that I'm finding myself sitting in front of a psychiatrist and a psychologist,
mm,
there's all these feelings which, sometimes it was even hard to articulate at the time, but it
mm.
was also, what are people going to think
Of
if
course.
they know that I am, you know seeing a therapist is seeing a psychologist and a psychiatrist. These are, it's almost like a taboo. It's
Yeah.
like a taboo, right? We don't talk about these things. I mean, thank God now things like this are, it's changing, and there's more conversations around mental health. But at the time, it was a novelty for me. The whole thing and the whole experience was a novelty. And so I remember my first session feeling like I'd been forced to go
Yeah.
there, but also a part of me knowing that something needed to give. And that's in a nutshell my journey to therapy. But thank God that I went, honestly.
Yeah. Because
Yeah,
obviously you preach it now everywhere you go. You talk about the importance. That's
absolutely.
why Marble mental health is, that's why you birthed it. And I understand the importance. Is it fair to say that when we have that breakdown at whatever age as adults, there's always some kind of route back to our childhood? And I wonder, so it might look like, I just wonder what your opinion is there, because from speaking to so many people, I read a lot about psychology and neuroscience, and I've had my going to see the therapist myself. You find that you could be going through a difficult stage in your life. It's like something causes you to break in the end. So maybe it's work or health issues, but there's nothing that says you couldn't have gone through that. Why did you break in that as opposed to going through that? And sometimes it's because of something that's rooted in a part of us that we don't know, that we've hidden from our childhood. But I want to hear your
Mhm.
opinion on that. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that on the surface, it may seem like it doesn't have its root in childhood experiences. But, a lot of research has pointed to the fact that children who go through various events or traumatic experiences in their life, and by trauma, I'm not talking about the most horrific stuff here that we might easily be thinking about, like, abuse, for example. But, trauma can mean very different things for people. But there's research that has shown that children that go through traumatic experiences, growing up, and especially if that is undealt with, are more at risk of developing mental health conditions in adulthood. So depression, anxiety, kinds of mental health
Mhm,
disorders that
mhm,
we see today. And so, the short answer is yes, absolutely. That I think there is a big tendency or a big likelihood that, a lot of the breakdowns that we see
mhm.
manifesting in adulthood in individuals stems from unresolved
Yes.
issues, unresolved experiences that may have occurred in the journey of their growing up. And so, whilst what may have caused the breakdown at a point in time in adulthood, that is more of the, it's the tip of the iceberg. It's like the straw that broke the camel's back. And when you find out, when you go through therapy and you start to peel back the layers,
Mhm.
a lot of the behaviors or the reaction or the responses that that individual has manifested physically, is a result of unprocessed
Mhm.
feelings, emotions, events that have taken place in the past, that have taken place, as a child.
It's so important you said that, unprocessed feelings. That's the biggest thing. I'm so big on, if you know, go on my Instagram page or when I'm speaking to parents, I'm so big on validating the feelings of your child. Behavior is communication. Let them speak. Let their actions and the way they speak, it's them releasing what's inside of them. And I can't tell you how many times growing up I heard, stop, what's wrong with you? Don't, almost like shutting down the feelings. Don't show this kind of emotion. You hear people tell boys, say to boys, boys don't
Always
cry. There's so much about suppressing the feelings. The problem is it doesn't go anywhere. It
Yeah,
stays and develops this monster that's waiting to reveal itself. Now,
yeah.
another thing I've also, experienced, read, and seen was speaking to parents is that it tends to reveal itself more. Those unprocessed feelings tend to reveal itself when you actually in relationships. And the reason
Mm-hmm.
why I'll point that out is because with parents, for me, in my experience, I was completely fine. I was a normal, fine, complete, controlled human being until I met my husband. I fell in love with him. And that's when I started to see that, oh my gosh, there were things in me that were not quite, because for the first time you become vulnerable, you give yourself in a relationship to someone. And the second time it happens with people is parenting. And this is why I'm stressing this with, parents. It's important that you look at, parts that are unresolved, because either in marriage it shows up or in your parenting. And the saddest part with the parenting side of it is that you then pass that on to the child. And
Yeah.
that's when it becomes a cycle. So I just wondered if you could share with us anything that maybe came up from your childhood, because what we really want to help parents with is childhood experiences that could have an impact in adulthood, and you may not be aware of it. I want parents to be aware so that they can deal with it on their own, and also so that
Mm-hmm.
they don't unintentionally put that on the child. So is there anything that maybe came up during your sessions that you saw were unresolved from your childhood that were
Mm-hmm.
part of the issue as a
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I can think of one example, and I would say it's a very common example, particularly, growing up in an African culture or environment. And I think that's around academics. So I think, you know, as I'm sure you would have experienced or have seen, right? The African parents have a tendency to really want their children to do very well, which is great, which is fantastic. Where we place such a huge importance on education, and I'm so thankful as well that my parents did that for me. But I can see that one area where I perhaps struggled, especially in adulthood, as a result of some of the way that things were handled in childhood, is on the concept of failure. And so failure for me growing up was not an option. It
Mhm.
was not an option because the expectation when you came back home, when I came back home from school, with school report, the expectation was that you were in the first top 3 or first top 5. um, and so as a child, I remember always seeking validation from my parents that I've done well. And
Yeah.
so even when I didn't make it maybe in the first 3 or even in the first 5, I
Mhm.
just remember feeling like, I need you to tell me that this is okay. I
Wow.
need you to tell me. Yeah. And
Mhm.
I didn't always get that,
Mhm.
and so as a child, in talking about it now, it's almost like I'm looking back at young Chika and
Mhm.
realizing that she was standing there very emotionally vulnerable and just wanting to be told it's okay, you'll do better next time or something, or it's totally fine. Your score on this particular exam or test is not a reflection of your intelligence, it's
Yeah.
not a reflection of your abilities. And that's not necessarily something that I received. And again, this is not an indictment to my parents or anything
Yeah.
like that,
Mhm.
because this is what they also grew up in. This is
Mhm.
how things were. This was the norm. This was the expectation.
Mhm.
So, but I then fast forward to adulthood, and
Mhm.
I find myself in scenarios where I'm not always succeeding. I'm not always first 3,
Mhm.
and it's not even only academically.
Mhm.
What's interesting is that experience translated itself to my
Of course.
entire life experiences. And so even with relationships, if a relationship failed, automatically I saw that as me being a failure.
Yeah.
So there was no separation between Chika as an individual
Mhm.
and failing an experience. To me, they were one and the same. And I think that that's had a very, very, it's one of the things that I've had to, take time and peel back and unpeel and get to a place of realization that failure does not define me,
Mhm.
that failure is not something that you embody and personalize.
Yeah.
Failure is just something that you go through. Failure is also an opportunity to learn.
Mhm.
And actually, the more that, when we allow ourselves room to learn from this, we become much richer individuals than if we are only ever focused on succeeding at all costs.
I love what you said so much, because I also want to stress this to parents that children do not separate incidents. It's always one and the same. They make connections with every single thing. So if you're focusing on failure and giving that, whether we like, I've also mentioned this, on my page, talking about conditional love. That's an example of giving conditional love when the child does well. It's unintentional, but we are imperfect beings. It's very difficult to love unconditionally. It's something that we need the Holy Spirit for, if we're being honest. So that conditional love when they do well, and then it's withdrawn when they haven't done as well. It could just be by not paying as much attention to them. It could just be by ignoring.
Yeah.
It doesn't even have to be anything you say. The child then starts to pass that on to every other area where they feel they haven't done well. It moves away from academics. It becomes everything else in their life. And so I always stress to parents, it's so important that we always show love unconditionally. Now, what I find with this whole thing, because I had it as well, I got a lot of validation from my performance. And so that became the most important thing to me. Performing well became a very important thing to me, but that was at the expense of my social connections. That was at the expense of any kind of other relationship. But the fact of the matter is, grades can get you into the room. I say this all the time, but you need character, emotional stability to stay in that room. You can
Yep.
perform so well, get in there. And again, I say to parents, when you're focusing on the performance of the child, you are missing the actual child.
Yeah.
The child knows there's so much more than that, but you're only focusing on this one area. And so in the end, they then reduce themselves to that one area, which is what you did. It was a reduction of yourself to that
Yeah.
one area. And so whenever performance doesn't go well, the whole of Chika and the whole of
Crumbles,
area crumbles.
literally.
But this is what we do unintentionally as parents. And I want parents listening to think this is what happens unintentionally. It happened to our parents, it happened to us. And I don't want us to repeat that. We have to be raising the whole child. The child has to
Yeah.
know actually their emotional stability. If we take care of that, the grades will come.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If we try and find out who they are, the whole person, they will perform well anyway.
Yeah.
There's another thing which you mentioned, which is the concept of failure. And I feel like that's a whole other session, because if I
It
had the
is.
power to remove the word failure from the dictionary, I would, because I've decided that it's a rubbish word. We don't even understand it anymore. We don't get it, because what we consider failure to be,
Mm.
is that really failure? I was walking and I fell and then I got back up. Did I fail when I fell? Was that failure?
When you put it like that, then yes, the word needs to go.
I think the word needs to go. So I think there's a lot of pressure there. And also there's a lot of things that our parents have done, and it's always to help us. I haven't come across any parent that wants anything bad to happen to their child. It's always very positive. It's always good intentions. But we
Yeah.
need to understand as parents that even our good intentions could yield negative responses. So it's not a case for us to feel guilty about it. It's a case for us to be aware and do things differently. The wanting our children
Absolutely.
to do well academically is because of the fear that if they don't do well academically, they will fail in life. It's that fear that causes the control and the over pushing. It's the fear that causes the overreaction. So if we realize, actually, do they fail if they don't get the A grade in maths?
Mhm.
Is that actually, So it's
Yeah.
parents just rethinking about all of that. I love how you've put it. I just wonder as well if there's anything you will say to parents who are, because it's one thing I noticed. I know that you've got a big family, quite a few siblings. When I say quite a few, I've got two. So anyone that has more than you've got quite a few. And one thing I want to point to parents is, and just in asking you, did you find that your parents parented you all differently? Or did you find that it was pretty much the same parenting, but you received it differently? It's a very,
Oh, that's an interesting question. Uh, um, Yeah, I think that they parented us differently. I don't think that it was all equal. And I have to say, I'm probably, so my twin and I are the last of six siblings. And
You know, I asked this question because of your twin. I thought it's interesting to know how twins take the same parenting, because I suspect it very differently, right? But
oh, very differently. So it's two things. One, they parent differently. Two, we receive it differently as well. And so, if I think about the experience of my twin and I versus the rest of our siblings, I
mhm,
feel like my twins and I got away with blue murder.
being the last.
Being the last, exactly. We got away with things that, in the time of my sister, probably she wouldn't have been, my older sister, she wouldn't have been able to get away with. And
Mhm.
also there's strength in numbers,
Yeah.
twins too.
Yeah.
So it's like two against the one parent or
Yeah.
two against both parents
Yeah.
versus one against one parent.
So let's focus on you and your twin then, maybe.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah.
I think so. My twin and I. So, growing up, she was always considered the more vivacious, boisterous, outgoing one, and I was always considered more the introverted one. You'd always find me with my book reading somewhere. I just wanted to be in my own world reading,
Mm,
and honestly, I would describe myself as a very melancholic child, and
mm,
so I think that say for example, maybe we did something, we were naughty, and um, my parents had shouted at us
mm,
or had a word with us. I think probably I would have received it. It would have affected me more
mm,
emotionally than my twin, just because of the kind of personalities that we
mhm,
have.
mhm.
Um, yeah, so definitely the way that we receive things as children is very different. There was something I wanted to add as well. I, there have been a lot of studies that show that children, and you think you touched on this earlier on in the conversation, children need their feelings need to be validated. The thing as well is that children don't really know how to process
Of
emotions.
course.
Developmentally, their brains are not developed enough to be able to understand every type of emotion that they are experiencing and knowing how to process it and knowing how to dissociate those emotions from who they are as individuals. And so you
Mm,
find out that the brain of a child is like a sponge. And
yeah.
so everything that is happening, the child is just absorbing it, absorbing it, absorbing it.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the guidance of a parent to
Yeah.
help them navigate those emotions,
You.
they can end up collecting a lot of information and making a lot of conclusions
Yes.
about
Absolutely.
themselves,
Absolutely.
yes, based on those events and experiences that are actually wrong, and that can have an impact on them in adulthood.
Mhm.
And so I can think of myself as an example, and I'm pretty sure that there were things that happened as a child where I thought, oh, it's me, or
Yeah.
maybe I'm not good enough, or those sorts of feelings. And what's weird is that if, in adulthood you grow up, you don't even sometimes realize that you have these
Yeah.
thoughts or these feelings on the inside of you. And it's only when you start to go through other life experiences that you start to realize, like, oh my God, this is how I feel about myself, and where
Yeah.
is this coming from?
Yes.
And
So,
it's only when you unpick the layers, in my case, it was through therapy that a lot of those layers were unpicked. And I
mhm.
realized it was childhood. I
Yeah.
realized that there were things that had happened in childhood that I had taken to be, this is you, Chika.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so I had to then go through the journey of going back to talk to 10-year-old Chika and
Wow.
help her to understand and
Mhm.
realize that those things that may have happened or were said or
Mhm.
not said
Mhm.
is not a reflection of who she is, and that what she concluded from those experiences that at that time may have served a purpose in that time but
Yes.
are no longer serving her, it's no longer serving her in adulthood. And
Mm.
so it's time to let it go. And unfortunately, I think a lot of us carry those things into adulthood
Yeah.
because they are kind of like a defense mechanism that
Yeah.
we've built up for ourselves. But the problem is that in adulthood, that defense mechanism is no longer working for us. It is actually now working against us.
Yes.
And that is why as you touched on one point, you go into a relationship or in marriage and you start to have some of these problems be-
Mm.
because you're trying to use defense mechanisms that
Yeah.
worked in childhood that are no longer serving you in adulthood, but are actually now working against you.
It's so spot on. And that's why I say to parents, the emotional side is so important. Children are always asking you, do you love me? Just listening to
Yeah.
you, I can imagine that some of your thoughts were, they don't love me as much as maybe my twin or as much as my siblings, or just, and that's not true. But I can hear that because I speak to so many, and that's how I felt as well. It's not even they don't
Mm.
love me. Nobody loves me.
No.
And the thing is, you feel as human beings, we want to tell a story. Stories are so important for us. And we want to tell a story. And so when something happens, we want to explain it to ourselves so that we can cope with it. Parents need to
Mhm.
realize, I've said this so many times, that our brains, the number one thing our brains want to do is keep us alive. So if there's something that we receive that is quite negative or we don't like, we have to tell ourselves a story so that our brain can prevent us from putting ourselves in that situation again. And that's the defense mechanism.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
that's the thing. And every time your child comes up to you, whether they come up screaming, shouting, hugging, laughing, whatever they come up with, they're asking you, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you see me? Do you accept me? I wasn't top 5. Do you still love me? I didn't do as well as my sibling. Do you still love me? It's
Mhm.
constantly, do you
Mhm.
love me? You're laughing with her more. You're laughing with him more. Do you love me? It's literally, I'm sure parents will agree with me that, the minute you pick up your phone to speak to a friend, that's when your children want your attention, because to them, attention is finite. And if you're on the phone with one person, it means you're giving your love there. Do you still love me? Do you still love me? That's what they're asking. And we have to find ways, not to always say, yes, we love, but we have to find ways to let them know that, listen, mommy loves you, daddy loves you, and that kind of thing. There's one more thing which you said I thought is really quite important, is looking very much at how parents respond to their children
Mm.
and how the children see themselves. You see, the way the parent responds to the child becomes the child's view of the world. If mom and dad give me a certain response when I haven't done well, that's the same way the world is going to treat me. And so they take that and take it out into the world with them. And I think
Mm.
that's something that parents just have to be very aware. What really do you want your child to be learning from this experience? Making them know. And again, oh gosh, I feel like there's so much. It's funny listening to people, you just see so many things. Another thing is, you described your character, and you might know this, it's quite similar to the kind of child I was. Very
Yeah.
similar in terms of, just being that quite serious, deep depth, deeper than deep. Serious child, and I love to read as well and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know if you found this. This is now me talking about my experience and what I see from speaking to other children and parents, is that somehow in the world, depending on what family you're born into, or depending on what society you're born into, some character traits are more accepted than others. So a lot of the time, my character was seen as, in my opinion, negative. It's like, I'm not the fun one to be around. Oh, you take things too seriously. And if that's who you feel like you are, and you see the deeper meaning in things that happen, or you like to go deeper in your research or whatever, and then you feel like, oh, why can't you just be the fun jovial one? Oh my gosh, you're just so. And that started to make me feel like who I felt I was naturally. It was natural for me to want to go deeper, and if that's not accepted in my environment, there's something wrong with me.
Mm.
Then you find yourself as children starting to mold yourself to fit into what the family loves, and then you find out that you can't. So there's something really wrong with you, because you can't even be this person they want you to be. And I don't know if that's your experience, or if you want to say
Yeah.
anything about that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm like nodding and smiling because I can so relate with
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I was always considered the serious one.
Mm.
In going to boarding school and secondary school. I mean, they had names for me in terms of my
Oh, oh.
seriousness. And and I think, it's exactly what you said, that as people start to say these things over and over again, you start to believe them. You start to believe that, well, actually, this is who I am. And what happens is that the other side of you is lost in the
Yes.
process. And so just because you're the child who loves to read a lot doesn't mean that you don't also like to play.
Yes.
But people see you from just this one dimension. And so you start to see yourself from this or that one dimension, even though
Mm-hmm.
deep down you know that there are other parts to
So
you.
true.
You know that you like to play or you like to sing or all these other things as well that happen, that happens to you. And yeah, I think also there really needs to be a change and an acceptance of the fact that we're all different and we're unique. And so if a child is more serious and likes to read books more, so what?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's nothing wrong with that. It's absolutely fine. And each child should be celebrated on the merits of their individuality, on the merits of their characteristics, their God-given nature and their characteristics, and given the space and the room to explore other sides of them, at any point in time, should they wish to do that, without it being seen as or what's happening now. You are,
Yes.
it's like, are
You're
you
trying.
suddenly becoming unsafe? So
Yeah.
it's like when I'm serious is a problem, but then when I try to actually play, it's
Oh,
now also a problem because it looks like I'm no longer serious. So
yes.
you find out that you can't win. You
Oh,
really
oh.
can't win. You
Mm,
really can't win. And I think that one of the most powerful things that a parent can do for a child is to give that child the confidence and the
yeah,
room to discover who they are
love it.
very early on.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you grow up in adulthood, I was thinking about this yesterday and I realized that the world it's a tough place to live in. You know, Whitney Houston sang this song, The Greatest Love of All, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she says that loving yourself is the greatest love of all. Now, I don't necessarily think that loving yourself is the greatest love of all. I mean, the greatest love of all is the love of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
But I will agree with her that she's very close to something here, because she says in one of the lines, it says, show them all the beauty they possess inside,
Right. Yeah.
right? And I remember thinking, every act of punishment that a parent gives to a child
Yeah.
without, that is not explained why I'm doing this and the benefit of what it is telling the child the opposite. It's actually telling the child you're not good enough, because that's what the child is going to hear, even though you as a parent you're not saying
Mm-hmm.
this child, you're not good enough, but that is what the child is hearing. That
Mm-hmm.
is what the child is absorbing.
Mm-hmm.
And so she says, give them a sense of pride to make it easier in the
Yes.
song. And I believe that is so important, because as they grow up in the world is going to be tough. The
Yes.
world is going to be throwing everything at them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what we should be doing as parents is raising up children that are well rounded and confident in themselves, proud of who they are, so that it makes their experience of going through life easier. And I think that the greatest love of all is only achieved when parents model that love to their children. Because the way that a child loves himself or herself is a direct function of how they see you love them on
Yes.
a day-to-day basis, when they've done well and when they've messed up.
Mm-hmm.
When they've messed up and you still show them the same love that you would when they've done well,
Yes.
what that tells them is, I'm loved, period. I am accepted, period. And that is what raises a confident child.
Absolutely. Honestly, I feel like this is a brilliant place to bring it to, and you're so spot on. That's the unconditional love of Christ. That's what we need to be showing the children, not you're loved when you do this. Thank you so much, Nika. That's been amazing. I have to say that that's what parenting on purpose is. You've touched on so much about what it's being intentional about telling your children and showing them how much they're loved. It's also raising them with a sense of purpose and pride. And the way to do that is by accepting who they are completely. So I think you've just put that so brilliantly. Thank you so much. I have to say, I'm going to put your information so people can go and find you on Instagram and find your Marbl mental health page, because that's such a good place. So many tips that parents can just use to help them look after themselves and honestly seek help.
Yeah.
We all need help. We've all gone through it. I've gone through it, Chika's gone through it. There's so much. And I just want to thank you because this has been so insightful. And I believe and I hope that our parents would have learned a lot from this. Thank you so much, Chika.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thank you so much for having me. And absolutely, I'm such a big advocate in mental health. And I really do believe, and I wanted to share this as well with the listeners, that, if you're a parent and you're struggling either with yourself emotionally or your child, don't be afraid, don't be ashamed to seek help, seek professional help. There's so many therapists out there that work with children, work with parents, work together with parents and children as well. And what you're really doing is investing in the emotional and mental well-being of your child. And that translates itself holistically to who that child ultimately ends up becoming in adulthood. So this is something that we've got to take more seriously, and we've got to be intentional about. And I'm really so grateful for, you having me on this platform and allowing me to just share some of my own experiences.
Thank you for listening to Parenting on Purpose podcast today. Remember to subscribe, leave a rating, and share with a parent who cares. You can follow me on Instagram at abiara.broly, where I post tips and videos regularly to help you on your parenting journey. Let's do this together for our kids.